Welcome back, everyone. California animal welfare groups are pushing for more state oversight of shelters and rescues. The coalition includes the San Diego Humane Society. They want a new state bureau to license facilities, conduct inspections, and investigate complaints. Supporters point to recent cases, including via Chardonnay and Julian, where 728 animals had to be rescued. The group will take its message to the state capitol next week. News 8's Shannon Handy spoke with the Humane Society. Here's her report on the proposal.
California has some of the strongest animal welfare laws in the country, but Humane Society officials say there's no one single agency that ensures those laws are followed. And that lack of oversight allows problems to grow until animals end up in crisis. The case at Villa Chardonnay and Julian is one local animal advocates say should never happen again. Back in May, more than 700 animals were rescued from the so-called sanctuary. Many were found malnourished, emaciated, or injured. Some were so severely neglected they had to be euthanized.
We've had so many cases that really are heartbreaking.
Gary Weitzman, president and CEO of the San Diego Humane Society, says local agencies work hard to enforce animal welfare laws, but with limited resources, critical problems can be missed. He also points out that rescue organizations often operate across county lines, yet no single state agency tracks licensing, inspections, or complaints.
It does not exist in California, which boggles the mind, because we are the most progressive place in the country for animals, and yet we have no oversight authority to actually recognize that.
How we doing?
To change that, the San Diego Humane Society has joined forces with animal welfare organizations across the state. Next week, members of the coalition will be in Sacramento to push for a centralized Bureau of Companion Animal Welfare within the California Department of Food and Agriculture.
The state would actually be making sure that everybody is on an equal playing field, which is where we all should be. Local authorities would still have the responsibility to take care of neighborhoods.
Weitzman says the idea has gained strong support, but there are still hurdles ahead. The coalition must find a lawmaker to author legislation and answer questions about how the new agency would be funded.
What we can actually counter with is with licensing fees and other fees to this agency, it could negate all of the costs of doing something like this.
Under the proposal, animal rescues would help fund the Bureau through licensing fees. Weitzman says those fees would be scaled based on factors such as an organization's size and number of animals. He argues the costs would be outweighed by earlier intervention in troubled facilities like Villa Chardonnay.
There would have been licensing issues and regulation issues that might have happened long before any animals were harmed, not to mention avoid the extreme cost of running in to actually rescue a rescue. Our current case in Julian has probably cost us somewhere between $2 and $5 million.
Weitzman says similar regulatory agencies already exist in more than 30 states, except for California. Reporting from the San Diego Humane Society, I'm Shannon Handy for News 8.
$2 to $5 million.
Yeah.
And that number is growing, by the way.
Wow.
And that's just for the Villa Chardonnay case.
Wow.
Not to mention all of the other things the Humane Society has to deal with, overcrowding, et cetera, et cetera. So
Talk about price tag.
Yeah, 30 states have something similar to what these groups are calling for.
Right.
Why doesn't California have something like this?
that's a great question. That's what Weitzman was saying. You know, he is baffled by it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty crazy when you think about how strong our laws are here and they just don't have a regulatory agency. And of course, my first question, and I addressed this in the story, was, well, what about you guys? You guys have your own law enforcement, so isn't that on you? And he said, we don't have the resources it takes to follow all of these cases. And mind you, law enforcement gets involved when evidence has been presented, which means there's already a problem.
Right.
Whereas where the state can step in is if the state handles licensing and requires yearly visits, things like that, they might see a smaller problem before it becomes a larger one. And that is his main point. And it could have maybe prevented the Villa Chardonnay case.
And I think that that's interesting because there are a lot of other sort of like segments within our life where there are state sort of bureaus of things that go on, and every county in California seemingly has a humane society or some semblance of like an animal welfare law enforcement agency. And so it does sort of strike me as baffling that San Diego County is obviously making the call. I'm sure other counties have made the call here. But what else would they like to see happen? Because we look to the Humane Society for the humane treatment of animals, big and small, not just dogs and cats, right? But they've got a lot on their plate. I mean, you mentioned that price tag, it's only growing. What are some of the other problems that they are currently addressing?
Well, right now they are, as of yesterday, I believe the number was 160% over capacity.
Oh.
And this is a no-kill shelter. Mm-hmm. So no matter what animal comes in, they keep that animal. And they get called out to all sorts of situations. We've covered them on the news, not just Villa Chardonnay, but there's hoarding cases inside small apartments. So they go out to all of those cases, and they are required to take the animals, care for them. And it's so bad that they have warehouses at the San Diego facility that were always meant for supplies, and now they've had to put animal cages in there to hold all of these animals. So there's lots of costs associated with that too, right? There's the food and electricity and all those things. So they are spread very, very thin. And one other point they brought up in the story was that there's no regulatory agency statewide. And, I asked about, well, what about your jurisdiction? I mean, you guys are supposed to spot these things. And they mentioned the resources, but also keep in mind, a lot of these animals move from county to county to county.
Yeah.
So shelters share space, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just no mainstream regulatory body to follow these cases along because they go to a different county and they kind of get lost in the pile, so to speak.
I also wonder how a state regulatory agency could help with, there are cases of sort of repeat offenders who go from county to county. Notably, there was the gentleman who had the ducks, remember, a lot of the birds. He had been a problem with Riverside County. And he was able to sort of escape that, come to San Diego County, and then eventually San Diego County Humane Society and sheriffs got involved, and they were able to stop. I mean, there was pretty dire conditions. Obviously, the Villa Chardonnay, they had some pretty bad conditions too. But I have to imagine it would also sort of help with coordination.
Yes.
Between agency to agency.
That's a huge thing because the San Diego Humane Society, as Gary Weitzman pointed out, I mean, he is the president and CEO, so he's biased, but he said, we are the gold standard of animal shelter care. But you have so many shelters across the state, and they don't operate the same way, and they don't have the same resources, nor do they have the same education. So this is a way to really coordinate with one another, make sure we are all sharing the same knowledge and helping each other out with resources. And I believe also it's one of those situations where, when there's a big case in San Diego or any city and they call in the FBI for help, I believe that would be a part of it as well.
Right.
Villa Chardonnay is so overwhelming for the Humane Society. I mean, 700 plus animals.
Yeah.
So I think it might be a situation where if we had a state bureau, you could say, okay, San Diego Humane is, the leading agency on this case, but we're bringing in the bureau to help us out.
Yeah.
So it would help fill in those resource gaps.
And then they could help coordinate transfers of these animals because, as you said, I mean, we're already overcrowded at San Diego Humane Society. So now you throw in these cases where you're trying to rescue these animals and they do need a place to go, big and small. How do they feel about their chances here in Sacramento?
So the good news is there's a lot of animal lovers in the California legislature. But the problem is the funding, right? Anywhere you look nowadays, that becomes a hurdle. And so I asked Gary about that, and he mentioned that if there was a state bureau, then there would be licensing fees that each shelter organization would have to pay. And I said, well, how are shelters going to feel about more fees? I mean, anytime you bring up more fees, people get upset. And he says, well, it would not be just a single fee. It would be a sliding scale. So if you're a really small organization that doesn't care for a lot of animals, you're not going to pay as much as the San Diego Humane Society. But they believe that these fees will negate themselves because, again, the Villa Chardonnay case may not have gotten as bad as it did if not for earlier intervention. And now they're looking at a $5 million plus price tag.
Yeah. Wow. Anything else in your conversation with the CEO that you could share with us that maybe didn't make the story?
We talked about a number of things, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, obviously, the big thing was the overcrowding. That's an issue, and it's separate from what's happening. So I think that is still a good point to continue to let the public know about. If you want to foster or adopt, visit a shelter because they are spread very, very thin. Yeah. I think it's very stressful. But what I will say is this coalition came together very quickly. And the Villa Chardonnay case was instrumental in getting all these agencies aligned to say that is not okay.
Yeah.
When you have 700 plus animals and you have to euthanize many of them because they were just so heavily neglected. And that case, by the way, I mentioned that number is still growing. It's because they still have not been able to get all the animals to other shelters or adopted out. So the expenses are just growing and growing, and it's just such a big problem.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, Shannon, thank you so much. And we look forward to the update there to see how it is that the coalition does there in Sacramento, speaking to our lawmakers.